what are students learning in the classroom? What are the opportunities? You're looking at what are alumni, the positions that they're in, looking at what they took in terms of classes throughout their undergraduate or graduate career, and then being able to take that data, work with current students and say, you want this position, this type of role in this particular industry, here's what you need to take as you go through the process. But it isn't just the classes. So here's the internship points of connectivity. Here's the organizations you can connect with. You want this role in this industry. Here's the pathway to make that happen. You can call it the Annenberg Insights Project.
That was James Vasquez, who's the Associate Dean for Strategy and Operations at USC's Annenberg School of Communication and Journalism. We had a fascinating conversation about the role of technology in student success. We talked about online and hybrid learning, ubiquitous connectivity, making decisions about what's in the enterprise tech stack, personal devices, and as you heard in the clip, the ways you can use data to connect coursework, co-curriculars, and more to a career path. I think you're really going to enjoy this, so let's dive in. Welcome to the Connected College podcast. I'm your host, Elliot Felix. I've helped more than 100 colleges and universities change what they offer, how they operate, and how they're organized to enable student success. And if you're a leader in higher ed and you think that the silos and separations get in the way of student success, then this podcast and my book, The Connected College, are for you. We're here to learn and work together to bust silos, question tradition, and forge partnerships so that students feel connected to their college, their community, their coursework, and their careers. Delighted to welcome James Vasquez from USC Annenberg School of Communication and Journalism to talk about a subject that's near and dear to my heart, the role that technology can play in student success. Welcome, James.
Thanks, Elliot. I appreciate the invite. And it is also near and dear to my heart in terms of technology and student success.
Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got started in higher ed and technology.
The history is actually pretty interesting. Is that I'm a Air Force brat, and my father was in the Air Force for 20 years. And one of his locations he landed was at the University of Missouri in Columbia, Missouri. And he was in the Air Force ROTC unit. And so as I look out my window to the left of me, the building there looks exactly like the place that my dad worked, because it's also the ROTC unit here at University of Southern California. And so it's been a 32-year journey for me here at USC. And I've had an opportunity to really have multiple careers. And it went from the admissions side to financial aid, academic advisement, facilities operations. And then as I landed in IT, I've had a long stint in IT, which really started from and this is, I think, one of the things I'm always telling students, you never know where you're going to land. One of the positions I had in our enrollment services unit back in the late 1990s was managing the university's call center. And the call center required me to understand and begin thinking about technology from the delivering of phone services to an initial part of web development, which sparked an interest in how is IT being used in an academic environment. Didn't know it at the time that's what I was going to be doing, but it actually was the seed to me being able to start thinking about the types of roles that I would like to play in my professional career, which landed me at the University of Southern California, Annenberg School. Initially, facilities and operations, then it became IT, then became the CIO, and then I'm also, at this point in time, I'm the director of operations and strategy for the school.
It's so interesting, all the different parts of higher ed that you've touched while going full circle ROTC to ROTC, and the advising, the operations, the enrollment, the technology. I think that gives you a really interesting perspective on all the different ways that universities can attract, retain, support students. I'd love to hear your definition of student success.
When it comes to student success, it begins at the front component when students start thinking about, where am I going to go to school? Which from a university perspective is the recruitment component. which then lands into admissions, which just lands into learning and research, teaching in the classroom, to graduation, to being an alumnus and points of connectivity there. So as you think about student success, is that every one of these components has an element that touches upon the other. And ultimately what institutions should be looking at doing, and I think we do that quite well here, is we're looking at what is that experience from start to finish, with the end result about student success is being able to provide students with background, knowledge, experience throughout that entire experience that allows them to move forward progressively, aggressively, and responsibly in their professional career when they graduate, and also give them the tools to deal with life in a professional environment, making sure that they're ready when they're out in the professional world and being able to tackle all the life related components attached to it.
I love that kind of holistic thinking along that journey. What are some of the key moments that you think are really critical to student success, from recruitment to career, life, everything along the way?
You touched on the beginning point, which is the fit, right? We're always
Yeah.
talking about, and this is why institutions, what do? They say, come to campus, visit us. You walk in, you have that aha moment. That's the location I want to be. Now, along the way, there's those expected and unexpected moments that are also part of the key things in your experience, which would be a class that you took, a professor or a staff administrator that you've met, an organization that you are connected to. You have to be able to have a point of activity that connects you to that institution as you have your journey. Think about the tools, the skills that you learn, and the people, and that's what's going to connect you to the institution as you move forward.
Hearing you talk, connectivity, connections, meeting came up a lot. And it almost feels like connectivity is like a KPI for student success in your mind. Like, how connected are our students, like, to each other, to their classes, to their professors within a student organization? Am I hearing that right?
Oh, absolutely. I always think about things, connectivity, in terms of brick and mortar, and then the IT points of connectivity attached to that. What do we know today? We know that everybody is connected consistently. It's right, 24/7, ubiquitous points of connectivity via devices. And really the personal device component is one of the critical pieces. And then you have plethora of applications to be able to connect you on a consistent basis. I just finished up a class, organizational behavior and business development class. And that class, the one thing that students told me as they were managing their student projects is, and this is something I asked them right to begin with, how are you going to stay connected throughout this process? What tools are you using, right? What are those things that you know are going to keep you connected? And they made decisions. We're going to use Google, right? Or we're going to use Teams, or we're going to use Slack as a mobile connectivity component, or texting. And they had to decide what that mechanism was going to be. But the thing that they all will say is, the differential point is how connected they expected themselves to be as they work these projects. The IT component, the tools are there to be able to have 24/7 ubiquitous connectivity, but it doesn't necessarily mean that's what's happening when you look at the day-to-day type of interaction.
So as you think about the role that technology plays in student success, the basic one is providing the tools for students to make these connections, but you can't really stop there. You have to put them to use and be talking to students about which platforms they're going to use for what, and prompt those discussions, because they may not be thinking about it, or the expectations may not match reality.
A lot of these students, at least in this particular class, you got a range of freshmen to seniors, mostly freshmen, first time they're actually engaging this type of environment, and they haven't been exposed to how an organization, a team functions. And so this gives them their first foray. So you got to at least seed it, and then they run with it. And we know that these students have grown up with tools. That's the difference today than it was 20 years ago. They've grown up with tools and skills and access to the various types of technologies that exist today, and they pick them up relatively quickly. But you just plant the seed to think about what it is that what they need to be thinking about, and then how should they communicate, and then they run with it.
So providing the tools, seeding the discussions or prompting the discussions, how else can technology enable student success?
When you think about technology development and history over the last 25 to 30 years, and in the past, initially, it's brick and mortar components, right? You had IT distribution within its space, right? It was, you come in, you sit in the classroom, you've got a projector, you've got a computer. They're not carrying them around, right? There is no personal attachment to that. You actually have it in that space. And so IT distribution was really focused within a singular environment. Today, we know that there are multiple avenues. It is, again, a 24/7 personal connectivity. You're not even thinking about the delivery of IT within a classroom environment. You're thinking about how you're delivering and continuing to deliver those IT functions beyond that into the students' common spaces they visit, their dorm rooms, and the study halls, et cetera. They need to have access to it. And the same thing at home. So the delivery and the types, really, they vary quite a bit because you're having to, as an IT administrator, think about where's that student, where are they going to be at, and how do they need to access the tools that you need to provide for them.
That's really interesting. And one of the contrasts you just made was to a time when people weren't personally attached to technology, which I think is such an interesting point. I'd love to pull on that thread a little bit. How are students personally attached to technology now?
Yeah, and as we all are, we're 24/7 with a handheld device. There's students that pop into our classroom that have two computers and an iPad, iPhone, or an Android device. There's multiple ways. It's no longer about hardware, right?
Yeah.
It used to be about hardware and technology in a classroom environment. Then it became the development and distribution of laptops per individual. And now it's the student experience based on their own hardware devices, which has now become a ubiquitous tool that everybody has. And the external component is really an interesting one because you don't control what's developing in terms of platforms that are being developed outside of your academic environment. Access to whatever information they need right at hand. And you need to ensure that you can deliver, manage, and sometimes even control.
Yeah. And it seems like you've got something that's yours. It's a personal device. It's in your hand. It's got your own information, settings, photo, whatever it may be. It just seems like that begets a different relationship with technology than the kind of enterprise or institutional one from a previous iteration of higher ed. That's really interesting.
And actually, that's one of the key things associated with being an IT leader. You make decisions on what needs to be enterprise that you manage and control, and those that you don't. And that's a key thing. What's the foundational elements, which goes back to what's that experience that you're providing for students? How important is connectivity? Are you rolling out Microsoft Office 365 to every student, or is it access to Google and the Google Suite? What are those things? Because you're looking at it from the standpoint of those items that are proprietary to your institution and those that aren't. And so you need to ensure that you have some sort of mechanism to be able to distribute, maintain, and then manage. And this is something I think is really one of the more challenging components attached to higher ed leadership when it comes to IT. And that is, what is our role and where should we focus our resources?
How do you answer those questions about what your role is and where to focus?
I think a big part of it is going back to funding, financial, one. Two is if you can identify a tool that is ubiquitous to an entire population of students, then you identify that's something that you should manage and develop. But and I think those are actually some fairly easy things to identify. And then you let everything else run its course when it comes to those things that are unique to a particular department or academic unit.
So when you're trying to think about enterprise, you really do start with the greatest good for the greatest many. What are the tools that everybody needs? access
That,
to, or
yeah,
almost everybody.
that's always been my thought process. There are traditional types of applications that everyone should have. Email is still there. You need a communication device that's beyond that, whether it be Slack or Google. How do you connect everybody within your community?
You mentioned Slack a couple times. Are you using that to bridge the email divide? Because one of the big problems I hear in higher ed is institutions are emailing, students are basically not opening or reading them, and then universities are assuming that they are, and then opportunities, deadlines, whatever it might be, get missed. Are you using Slack to bridge that, or how are you effectively communicating with students?
Yeah, you have to hit them in multiple areas, right? It isn't, not everyone uses Slack, right? No, not everyone emails, not everyone texts. When you think about the type of options that you have to communicate with students, to me, there isn't one solution. You have to use multiple. It just, there's no way around that. Whether or not you're saying, we know that incoming students are pinging our website because that's their main part. That's where they're going to. We know that continuing students, we blast emails to them. That's fine. You have Slack channels you can communicate to them. We're right now going through an LMS transition. And that's the first time I've seen at this institution where you have such a broad enterprise rollout that is impacting the entire university community. And part of the communication is how we're ensuring that our students are aware of what's taking place. So I'm not Slack centric. It's just one of those things that's out there. You got to get them where they're at.
So I feel like we've outlined a lot of the big things that are changing the way technology is provided and supported. We've talked about personal devices and deciding what's enterprise, what's personal, and student communication preferences. You also mentioned looking at the data, who's pinging what, who's using what, using new tools like migrating your LMS. Are there other big things out there that you feel are changing technology as it relates to student success?
Obviously, AI is a huge part. And I say that just from the standpoint of what's developing quickly. It isn't just use of AI in a classroom environment, Chat GPT or others. Like, it is going to have a momentous impact on how we operate in and out of the classroom. Up until the AI conversation, there really hasn't been a broad conversation about any particular type of tool. And in this case, like, what does it mean as we move forward?
Right. Generative AI. And sometimes you forget all the administrative technology that's involved. It's not just the academic technology. So that's really interesting.
That's one of the areas when you think about IT, the difference between managing or leading IT teams today as opposed to the past. There's really more systems administration, networking management. Those are key things that you didn't really have to focus on that type of skill set in the past. You had a few of them, but there's actually, as more systems develop, more access, the issue about cybersecurity becomes a big component about being in an academic environment. And we're always concerned about any type of intrusion. Well, the only way you can actually deal with that is to ensure that you have sound systems that are being managed effectively. So you're putting more time and thought process into, I need to have the right systems admin, the right network admin. When you think about the focus in terms of the foundation, are you leaving it in the cloud? Is your backup environment on-prem? These are the things that are becoming a little more challenging because there's more access points that you have to deal with.
Yeah. The proliferation of systems and different platforms and how to keep them secure. And I think also how to make the data that's flowing into and out of them useful. Lots of new opportunities and challenges. I would love to hear some examples of technology enabling student success at Annenberg or across the country as you think about examples or initiatives that have really blown you away.
Going back to an enterprise related example, there's three things that I'd like to touch on. One is that there is the classroom environment has been pretty traditional for decades. It's just, you're walking in, you're teaching at the front of the room, you're making decisions about the content you're delivering in that spot. The only difference is, are you capturing that and distributing it post or pre, these types of things. And so the system developments, I think, is really an important one. And everyone handles that a little bit differently. Am I providing, do I have an online component attached to a class? Is it a hybrid component attached to a class? These are things that really are technology driven, but they also are curriculum based. And today you can make those decisions. Oh, I'm going to Zoom as opposed to being on-prem, and I can teach my class in the same manner. I just don't have that face-to-face interaction, which is okay on this particular piece of content. That's huge. And that is now ubiquitous. Like, you could do that in any environment, whereas in the past, you had to have focused areas that were only for that type of online environment. That's a major change and a transition that provides lots of opportunity for on-prem and hybrid teaching. And so that's one thing. The other thing is that the devices, the handheld component, and being able to put software applications in a student's hands without having to worry about that application being loaded and supported and focused within the limitations of that particular device. Right now, it becomes the thing that has become like one of the most dramatic changes when it comes to teaching in an environment and learning, and that's Wi-Fi accessibility. And a tremendous leap and jump in Wi-Fi. Institutions don't really have to have points of connectivity when it comes to hardwiring. If you have a very robust Wi-Fi environment, then you're good in any space within your environment, which is something that is one of the greatest leaps we've seen in terms of technology development. Those two things are just on a broad scale enterprise are really foundational. Then you look at all the applicational development that's taken place, and then the access to the applications and whether or not it's something you provide for students or whether or not they go out and provide it on their own. And I raise these because when it comes down to, it's like, all right, what's the core competency that you need to provide as an institution beyond those elements? So you ask about what are some of the big developments. Really on our end, it's like our biggest development has to do with software applications that are unique to an institution, unique to our environment. One of them is newsroom production software. In the past, you have to go and sit in front of one of our very robust desktop computers to be able to edit. Well, you don't need to do that anymore. You actually can ping into our systems. Our network administrator provides you access, and you can ping into our systems and have access to a very robust number of tools that allow you to remotely edit and to continue to operate in the manner of a journalist or a communication major, PR major, and have access to those tools remotely. That's really one of our core competencies. I think has been one of the greater developments, but you can only do that because of what's happening within the personal device, the Wi-Fi component, both within our environment, but also external.
So in terms of some of the examples that give us a window into the future, it's giving students a choice in learning modality and when, where, and how they learn. It's providing ubiquitous access, putting tools and information into students' hands. And then it's providing the unique applications that let them do their work, like edit from anywhere or use the same software in college that they're going to encounter in the newsroom in their career.
It's been 8 years since we partnered with Adobe Creative Cloud, and that was one of the big jumps that we made when we began thinking about what are the tools that are needed across multiple disciplines and creativity tools and just basic tools. We know a lot of these students use Photoshop, but a lot of them that need to use, for PR classes and Illustrator and design, we said, you know what, we should roll this out as an enterprise application to our students. And so we ended up partnering with Adobe to provide the Creative Cloud to all of our Annenberg students. And it's actually expanded to the entire university population now. We have multiple schools that are under that same enterprise agreement. And one of the reasons why we went down that road is because many of our working professionals came back to us and said, and that's that alumni connectivity. They came back to us and said, one of the key things that allowed them to get in this particular position was they received a certification in Adobe Illustrator in their junior year. and they put that on their resume, and that's a key skill set that can be provided that they know could be used in really about any industry.
I love that idea of working backwards from what's the tech that you're going to be using in your career and providing not just the access and the support, but the certification. And you're doing some interesting stuff with Salesforce as well, right? Trying to connect courses and careers with that.
That's the thought process as we've been talking about this, that the points of connectivity is like, what are students learning in the classroom? What are the opportunities? You're looking at what are alumni, the positions that they're in, looking at what they took in terms of classes throughout their undergraduate or graduate career, and then being able to take that data, work with current students and say, you want this position, this type of role in this particular industry, here's what you need to take as you go through the process. But it isn't just the classes. So here's the internship points of connectivity. Here's the organizations you can connect with. And so we have a really good model that was developed. Our Dean Bay, she rolled this out a couple of years ago. And we've been working pretty consistently on this internally, just again, developing this as called the Annenberg Insights Project. And the insights is, you want this role in this industry, here's the pathway to make that happen when you're when you're deciding what curriculum, what major, what classes, and then also the other points of connectivity.
What role do you think design plays in all of this? What role does design play in how technology can enable success?
I always think space first. It either encourages or discourages collaboration. And that's one of the things I think is one of the more important things about engaging today, is that collaboration can occur anywhere. And so it is, and this is the thing, designing spaces in a traditional manner with just classrooms, that does not play. You need to design spaces that provide for points of connection, easily points of connection with the robust infrastructure, robust Wi-Fi environments, seating, these traditional things about mobile furniture, mobility, the ability to engage one or multiple people at the same time. When I think of design, that can take place in or outside of the classroom, but that's one of the more critical things when it comes to the future, because you can have learning everywhere. You need to encourage learning, and you can only do that if you design spaces appropriately.
That's inspiring stuff. It's simple. Like either the space is helping or hurting people work together, and you better be on the right side of that. As you're thinking about the future, what advice would you have to your peers to use technology to enable student success?
Just a couple of thoughts, right? One is keep it simple. It's what are the basics, and then you build from there. And I think going back to where we talked about, like, what are the common infrastructure you need to be able to support your environment today? And then that should be your core competency. And then you build from there. It's always great to have aspirational components attached to that, but you need to address them first. That's one. The second is, it doesn't necessarily always have to be the best, right? The robust infrastructure isn't always needed. You need to identify what is the minimum, right? The MVP to be able to accomplish what you want to accomplish. And then, that's one of my colleagues, Charles Payton, always says, you measure twice before you cut. Test it. And then the last thing is your teams. And this is what's changing, right? You want to hire the right skill set, but you really want to hire the right skill set that understands the use of technology, but is curious about the use of technology and has general curiosity towards things. And so this is things that we're always looking, what's the curiosity about anything? But as an IT professional, the IT professionals have to be significantly more fluid in their thought processes and their ability to engage situations, because you don't control environments anymore, right? You manage environments, you develop them, you manage them, you're not controlling how they're being used. And that's really one of the more challenging things.
Really interesting. I like hiring for like curiosity and learning, knowing that the environment is going to be more fluid and you can't control, and what does that mean for the skills and the people you're looking for, I think is really interesting. And keeping it simple so that you have a focus and you pick your spots, and this has to be the best and this can be the minimum, I think is also really smart. James, thank you so much for your insights about the role that technology can play in student success, and congratulations on all your success.
Thanks, Elliot. Appreciate it. Appreciate you.
Thanks for listening to the Connected College podcast. Subscribe to my Connected College newsletter at elliottfelix.com for insights and excerpts from my upcoming book, tools you can download, and special offers. You can also find more information about talks I've given, articles I've written, and upcoming events there. And please support the podcast by rating and reviewing it wherever you're listening. Let's create connected colleges where students will succeed.